So thanks for inviting us for this. This is the first time we've done one of these meetups specifically around document understanding, so we're kind of excited maybe to roll it out a few other locations across the country. Of course, the people that register for the meetup aren't necessarily the people that show up. So what we really like to do is tailor the presentation to who showed up and what you care about. So you see QR code there. There's going to be 3 basic questions around who you are, what do you already know? Because if everybody knows something, I'm not going to, we don't need to cover it. But most importantly, why are you here? You're spending some time. Why? So, good. Mostly RPA solution architects, hands-on, just starting out. Okay. Got it. Business owner. Great. Okay, let's move on to the next one real quick. Thank you all. That should change on your phone there. So this is related to document processing in general, not specifically document understanding. That's the next question, but just document processing in general. What's been your exposure? Conceptually, good. Okay, most are conceptual. And a few of you have a technology today. Okay, all right, let's move on to I think this is the final question in the first part here. All right, and then this final one is, what's your level of understanding of UiPath document understanding? Oh wait, actually there's one more question after this. Sorry, it's about what you want to get out of it. Use it today, quite a few of you, great. Conceptual, super. So we've got some, definitely some experience there in the audience, that's great. Okay, let me move on to this is the final question. And so, what do you want to get out of this specific session? So anything and everything. Investigate whether there's actual value to pursue something. Want to deploy ASAP, or you just love hanging out here? I'm not surprised by these answers, actually. We've done a similar survey in a different forum, and that's basically what we got. Oh, a value to pursue. Good. It's good to see that, because we are going to cover that topic. Super. All right. I think that gives good context.
Steve.
What's that?
Steve, that people don't like hanging out with us.
Oh, come on. Actually, I didn't make that a multiple pick. I probably should have. Okay,
I saw the first one. Oh, shoot. I should have probably voted for that one.
Great. Thanks everyone for participating. That'll help us kind of frame this up. Here's the agenda here. We've got about 20 minutes up front, which is really kind of the baseline information. And I'll talk specifically about this. We call it a North Star. I think with document processing, sometimes there's some confusion around what you should focus on when you're looking at something. So I'm just going to spend some time there. How it works, I hope you'll get a lot of value out of that, because that's a conceptual, like what happens at each stage, and we can pause for questions there. And then if you want to roll something out, some of you have already, so would appreciate any sort of feedback you have. What are those considerations? What are some just high level considerations? And then we do the choose your own adventure for the rest of the session. So with that, key success factors. I know this isn't technical in nature necessarily, but it's super important when you roll out a document processing solution in general. What is that North Star? A lot of people get confused. They say, hey, field level accuracy, it needs to be such and such %. The reality is someone's got to pay for the solution. Someone has to allocate resources. So it's more of a business decision on whether there was success or not. So is it, potentially FTE time repurpose? That's one thing. And the other thing we see is that we don't involve the document experts soon enough. So we definitely want to bring them along for the ride to look at their document, figure out what's important in there and the exact information we need to pull out. I'll spend some time on that. And then the other area, which is new to a lot of COE members, is the whole concept of machine learning. And it's very true that you don't need to be a data scientist to do machine learning in UiPath, but it still requires some extra knowledge. And it requires an understanding of what to expect. So there's this concept of labeling, which we have a choose your own adventure we can dig into, in addition to kind of the balanced samples. So this is really about how these models get trained. We see a lot of people get tripped up because they don't fully understand. So those are success factors. When we look at kind of the real North Star here, which is about the business value. And this is just one slide, then we'll get to the how it works. But this is, if you think about like when we engage on any document processing solution, it's typically about increasing document processing throughput per FTE, while also decreasing the overall processing time. Sometimes that's a big deal, sometimes it isn't. And what also isn't here is accuracy. Maybe I've outsourced my document processing and it's not accurate all the time, and I want to do better than that. So that's why that's kind of the thing to look at. And with that, when we look at the success of it, it has to do with straight through processing rate. How many documents do I not have to touch? And then for the ones I do have to touch, how long do I have to be involved and correct and or send it off? So those are kind of the metrics that are super important to look at if you're even considering this. I'll more on that a little bit later, but let's dig into how it works. And so this is understanding kind of the complete process here with document understanding. And we'll start off with kind of the first part, which is this thing called the document taxonomy. And that's like a day one thing. You'll do that initially, and then you won't have to touch it over time necessarily for any given document. And so for this example, I've got like an RMA request form. Then I've got a PO and I've got an invoice. The form is a fixed form. It doesn't change. The PO and the invoice are variable layouts that the data is there, but it may change positions over time. And so when we look at the variable layouts, we refer to those as semi-structured, and then that form we consider a structured document. So if we look at the UiPath Studio process, as you jump into Studio and you're going to create this process, or you can use a template. Let's take, for example, the document comes in the inbox. Our first step here is that we're going to basically read the document with an OCR technology. And UiPath has our own OCR technology. It's free to use. You can use third party, but typically people choose the UiPath one because it's very good and accurate, and will, if not already, support handwriting as well, which is a new thing. But that's about capturing the raw text plus the metadata about the text, like where is it and some other things. Once we've read it, then we send it to our classification engine. And basically the classification is going to figure out what is the optimal method to extract the data in this specific document. So in this case, I'm showing a form. So that goes down to classify step, and it pops down to, in this case, we're going to use what we call the intelligent form extractor. But fundamentally, we can have a rules or template-based approach, which is handled inside or basically by the robot. Or we can have an ML-based approach. Here you see to the left of where we are right now for the invoice and receipt. Next step, which isn't talked about as, or shall I say focused on as much as we'd like it to, but these are the post-processing steps. So after we've extracted those fields, then we need to run it through, call it like the pre-human validation step, where we can actually look at the information that was extracted, and we can do like basic math on it. We could say, does the field follow a specific format, or does that field match up with some data that's sitting in another system? And this step is definitely the most critical in terms of the concept of straight through processing. Because even if the system looks at a field and says, well, my confidence is about 90% that that field's right. Well, is it or isn't it? The post-processing or business rules can actually tell us and can confirm whether the field was extracted right and move it on. We don't have to talk to a human, or involve a human, I should say. So there we go, straight through processing out to ERP system. Oops. So that gets it. So that's a form. So let's talk about a machine learning approach. So in this case, the invoice came down, was classified. Hey, looks like an invoice. Popped down to the extraction method. And we don't do that. The robot doesn't do that. We outsource the extraction to something called an ML skill. And the ML skill, think of that as the runtime. That's the thing that's taking the document, pulling out the fields, and passed it back to the system. That typically sits in AI Center. And when you think about how that skill is deployed, it's deployed with this thing called an ML package. And I know there's lots of terms rolling around, but The package here is really about the model itself, what fields, and then the most critical piece, which is the training data. So that package, basically from that package, we deploy the skill, and the skill actually does the work. We can take an adventure to dig into ML later if you'd like, but let's move on here. So invoice comes through, but in this case, the invoice fails for some reason in post-processing. So what do? We have to involve this human. And that's where through Action Center, we trigger an event, and validation station is used to go in and correct the data. While this is happening, though, we don't like stop any process. We can still continue to process documents. It just basically sits in a queue, and the system keeps running. Okay, checked off the invoice data. Of course, it goes to the ERP, but the other thing we can do is that we can take that validated data, and if we trust that it is validated correctly, we can then take that important data and put it back into the ML package and improve the model over time. So we could spend a half hour talking about that whole process, but that is a possibility, which is fairly unique in the market. I believe that is it. Any questions exist out there? Nothing in the chat? Okay, let's keep rolling.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. Okay, super. Hopefully that helps out kind of understand the overall process. And on the left-hand side of the screen, this is kind of our official marketing view of the different steps. And it's just on there for reference throughout this presentation, so you can kind of think about the different steps. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about the actual business value here, which again is really important in terms of justifying this, and also setting expectations with different teams. So of course, with any process we want to automate, we want to understand where these human touch points are. So as an example here with document processing, if you have existing process, there may be a step which is classification and preparation. So think email inbox, maybe the documents show up in a zip file, maybe it's just one file that has a whole bunch of documents. There may be a step there where a team has to like split them up, classify them, forward them on, move them somewhere. There may be a team that already does document processing. Of course, we'll want to find out what their job is like and how long it takes them and so forth. And then there might be a team at the end here, maybe a third team that is responsible for validating data, just certifying, hey, yeah, this document has the right information. I verified that in a bunch of systems. Or they actually have to go do the data entry into the destination systems. So key here, of course, is to look at each different team. Maybe there's one team, maybe there's three, maybe there's more, and we really understand their total time spent times the volume of documents. So if we look at an example here, if we actually want to quantify this, we've got a document coming in. Maybe that team that opens up the email, splits it off, forwards it, maybe it takes a couple minutes. This is just obviously an example. That team then will forward it on to that team that does the validation. So they're going to go out to the other systems, validate the data, and then actually input it into the destination system. So maybe that takes 10 minutes. I don't know, could be 5, whatever. Point is, find the number and then understand the volume of documents, and you can quickly come up with a metric here to go off of. So this isn't some complex formula. This is just total back of the napkin. This is the amount of time that my company spends processing these documents. Can I go deploy something that's going to help them out and be actually have business value? So when we look at document understanding here, the difference between previously and the document understanding methodology here is that we've got two teams. You've got the COE, which is managing the whole process. And then you've got the document subject matter expert. So they need to understand what's in that document, where to find the fields, all that. They're most likely going to be validating any exceptions that happen. So document comes in, we get to a point where maybe it needs to be validated by a human. They do that. Doesn't take them very long because they're presented with something, they make the change, they move on to the next document. It's in a queue. Very quick. So even if, as an example, even if that team had to validate every single document of those 100,000 documents, there's still a huge, huge benefit in terms of the reduction of time here. So a lot of people get caught up in, oh, I don't want to involve the humans and that sort of stuff. It's like, well, the humans are more efficient now. So there's definitely value there. Even if it was 50% human verified, then we're still doing well, 96%. Key here, again, find what it is now, and then find the threshold for you if you deploy document understanding and just do some basic math. That's super critical. We see so many situations where this doesn't get done and then it doesn't make sense. Most cases it does though. So our goal here, we want to minimize these. Even though they're small, we still want to minimize them. And to do that, we look at the two different steps here, the extract step and the verify step. So we look at the extract and verify, and specifically I want to talk about machine learning because that's typically new. When we look at the machine learning model age over time versus straight through processing, like is it doing it accurately? It's not one of these things where out of the box, you're done, that's it. It's this improvement over time, and it's various things you do to improve that. So first step here, of course, is there is out-of-the-box pre-trained models you've probably heard about, invoices, POs, ID cards, like some of these things. The key at this step to optimize is only extract the required fields. If I can go get that field from somewhere else and I don't have to get it from the document, all the better. This is where we have to involve the document SME to know if that data exists somewhere else or if we actually have to extract it. Initial, we call it retraining. So this is this process of labeling where you give it a bunch of samples and you have to map the labels and so forth to different fields. That's your training data. That's what makes this machine learning model better. And even though we may have an out-of-the-box model, we still like to take actual documents and a good representative sample of those documents and create some more training data so it's better fit for your processing in your documents. Mention this, the post-processing and the business rules. So this is very key. This is where we absolutely are working with the business that's processing the documents, finding out what can we do to automatically verify as opposed to have a human verify. And then final step here, which is very gradual, which is the fine tuning of that model with that validated data that happens within validation station. Okay, so important here. So this is very unique to any given customer that we get involved with. Huge value in some sort of deployment partner, someone with knowledge that they can go here, do these things, and that's a lot better than trying to go through the documentation and kind of figure out what's going on. If you have a deployment partner, it's going to go way easier. I like to think about like if I'm able to get this thing up and running faster, then the people that don't have to do document processing are much happier sooner. Sorry. If it drags on as you tend to learn how to do this, if you try and do it yourself and it drags on, sometimes they get worn out. So it's a matter of setting expectations and balancing, getting a partner and so forth. I think you get it. And then last bullet there, of course, is involve that document SME. So recap here, extract and verify. So balanced set of samples. So, we've seen cases where, oh, well, here's one vendor, and then we go train the model on that one vendor. But the reality is that one vendor is only maybe 20% of the different formats. So we need a balanced set of samples. You need to know what the required fields are. That labeling step's super important. With machine learning, huge benefits in using a GPU as you do this from a speed perspective, and that fine-tuning loop if you want it. From the verify step, post-processing, clean up the data maybe, apply the business rules, and then when it comes time, if you have to involve a human, make sure they're properly validating. They aren't just kind of going, this, they're doing it the right way. It's very key. So one real quick public example here. The only reason I want to bring this up is that it really highlights, number one, they're a massive customer for us. I don't know, I think they're well above this number in terms of pages processed. They've got about 6 machine learning models working with various documents and businesses. The thing I wanted to bring up is this. So They had a 70% improvement in time savings, but they did that when nearly half of the documents, 47%, actually go to a human. So most, if you show, well, 50% have to go to the human, it sounds odd. You still tremendous value here. So it's really about setting the right expectations more than anything else, and understanding that value up front. And then this all makes sense. Global expansion, and then the impact of that COE definitely showing a lot of value to the other businesses, and they're kind of expanding and reaching out to their other businesses. Okay. That's it for the first part. I think I went a little long.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, guys. So I will share my screen. We'll jump into a quick discussion, demonstration of the human and what that entails for document understanding. Give me 1 second just to get my human in the loop slide here. All right, let me know if you guys cannot see my screen for any reason, but in 1 second, you should be able to. So for human in the loop, we're just going to go through a few things. Before I jump into the actual demonstration, I want to just quickly discuss what it actually means for UiPath document understanding. For human in the loop, this is generally where we see business users coming into play in the end-to-end document processing solution. So in general, you might have a solution in place, you deploy it, and you have unattended robots that are working behind the scenes to process those documents. And as Steve mentioned, some of those documents are going to be processed without any manual intervention, no touch, just straight through processed end to end. But there are going to be scenarios where those business rules have triggered a need for human validation, or some kind of criteria has been met such that a pair of eyes needs to be put on the document, and the document should be acted upon. That's where human loop is going to come into play. That's where we see a few things being available to solution architects, to COEs, to teams to make the business user experience as streamlined as possible when they do have to complete certain tasks. One of those is the embedded validation station, which we'll see more of in a second. That is going to be an interface that business users can interact with and see the document and see the results that were extracted by the solution and quickly make corrections if needed. And then also you can actually create custom interfaces to present those to business users however format you need them to be in, whether that's showing a PDF viewer, whether that's showing different drop downs that you're pulling different information from. You also be able to have those customizable forms as an option to be presented as well. And we'll see in a second, there are multiple ways to present information to users, not just via the interface, but also via the actual medium. So that can be via their desktop, or that can be also via the web browser, where via their desktop, it'll be the custom form in a small application as a desktop application or the validation station. And then in addition to that, the web-based version, we have a tool called Action Center, where you can actually have business users log on and see a queue of tasks, which you see here, and we'll take a closer look in a second, a queue of tasks to actually assign to themselves and work through as the robots are processing documents in the background. I'll jump quickly to the desktop-based version of what this looks like. So if I was a business user who was going through the process of running an automation on my desktop, so I just went through, for example, and may have triggered an automation using my UiPath assistant to perform a two-way match, my robot wakes up, and then it might have triggered a need to actually validate a document. And so here on my desktop, I am presented the document that was currently being processed by my robot and the results with which the document processing solution extracted from the actual document. So here I can see from the document different pieces of information like the vendor name, the vendor address, and I can go through and double check if needed that this information was extracted correctly. If I do need to make any changes for any reason, I can make those changes. So for example, if for some reason this invoice number was actually the PO number, I can simply change that value and actually say, hey, this is actually the correct value for my invoice number. If I wanted to revert back to what I had before, I can do a couple things. I can actually use the hotkeys, and you don't see me pressing the hotkey right now on my keyboard, but you can actually use your keyboard to simply assign the value that you're looking for as needed, or you can always actually make any manual changes as a business user in the actual content that's extracted. Once I'm done with this, I'm able to save these results, and that's where the results that get saved will be passed back to the robot after I confirm these line items. Those results will be passed back to the robot, and they'll be stored, if you're using machine learning model, for retraining purposes, so you can actually use that data and improve the model over time. The last thing I'll show here is just the web-based version. So I'll jump to our browser here. You can have a similar experience from a business user standpoint to validate documents by using what we call Action Center. So again, we see the embedded validation station interface to validate a document sample that's been processed by a robot. But in addition to that, I can see a whole queue of items that I've assigned to myself for different document types, for different use cases, things that are pertinent to my team. And if needed, I can sort these based on certain priority or filter these based on certain features, even certain tags that have been applied to those documents, such as ones for document understanding or handwritten checks. And that would allow me, that would allow me to enhance my actual validation experience. And again, I would be able to use these tools to quickly move through the list of tasks I've assigned to myself. And once I've assigned a task, I can again use the tools built into the validation station to quickly validate a document and move through to the next one to pass it back to the robot and have it continue processing downstream. I don't know how much time that was compared to what we had allocated, Steve, but that's what I have for human loop experience. Happy to answer any questions around that.
So, Daniel, I guess I'll start here. A quick question around the Action Center. So, we had a customer that was like having like different business units, like trying to explore like this document understanding. So, let's imagine you have HR and like an AP group, like exploring at the same time, but these are like completely separate kind of documents, right? So, we have this modern folders, like making the permissions like them secluded so that they don't see each other's documents. So when it comes to Action Center, to give them permissions, there's no like managing their permissions at that level. So would you recommend the Action Catalog being the one that's driving their permissions?
So
I know it's a long question. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll try and rephrase, make sure I got it correctly. So the question is around how do we make sure that the right people are accessing the right tasks in Action Center, right? Generally,
Exactly.
we see that done with folders. So in general, your user management is going to be done via Orchestrator. You're able to assign permissions based on roles you've created within Orchestrator, and then the users will will be given access to certain folders. Those folders will have automations present within them where the automations will run, and if it's a document processing automation, they'll generate Action Center items. If Steve and I are in an organization and I'm in HR, he's in finance and accounting, if there are two separate folders within our organization, I won't be able to see any Action Center items that the finance and accounting document processing automations create and generate in Action Center. Steve would be able to see those. I would only be able to see the HR ones. So in general, that's how we see the partitioning between Action Center items for different teams within an organization.
Sweet. Thank you. That answers my question.
Yeah, I have another question. This is Raul Peña from Smart Houston. Daniel, I guess this is for Daniel and Steve. What is your take on doing document understanding training for documents that are not part of the out-of-the-box templates? Let's talk something like a bank statement. I know we have a base document understanding model. Have you guys tried to do any training for any kind of document that it's like that is not an invoice or all these pre-made packages that you guys provide?
I can give my take, Steve, Charles, if you guys want to chime in. So in general, if a document type does not align with one of the pre-trained models that we offer, that is still, you still have the capabilities within Document Understanding and AI Center to create a machine learning model that can be used to process that document type and can also still be retrained to improve from samples that you're collecting within Action Center or just over time from processing in order to improve that model's efficiency over time. So bank statements, for example, I think we actually, well, we might not have a pre-trained model for that right now in GA, but you would still be able to upload samples to AI Center, create a model after you establish a training data set to train that model, and then deploy that model so you can actually process bank statements, even though we didn't have a pre-trained model for that particular document type.
Okay.
And Steve, I don't know if you want to show the slide for
Yeah,
the
we actually have
packages.
two adventures that kind of cover that category. One is like just looking at the documents and their characteristics, and then the other is what are the different models and whatnot. So we'll pop over the adventure and we can check there. Any other questions on Daniel's human in the loop experience? Okay, so let's talk about the locations of ML skills really quick. And there's kind of two places these ML skills can live. One area is we do have like some public endpoints. So if you go to our documentation, you can see some of our pre-trained models out there. And you feel free to use them. They're free or community, so they're definitely limited in terms of what you can do. But it's a nice way if you're just getting started to kind of figure it out. The more common production way is in AI Center. And so specifically Automation Cloud, Automation Suite, or just standalone AI Center. And the big difference here is that with public endpoints, you don't need to stand up AI Center. You don't do any of that. It's just available. However, they're not retrainable. They're not going to necessarily get better over time. You get what you get. Whereas on the AI Center side, you certainly can retrain with your own documents. So as you get to the extract stage, you're going to have a couple of choices of what to put in. Just wanted to make sure you're aware of those choices. What makes up an ML skill? So as you recall from this extract stage, we're basically going to outsource this decision to something called an ML skill outside the robot. That's made up with this thing called an ML package. The ML package inside of it has something called a schema, which is really just think of it as the field definition. The training data, the thing that actually makes the ML model smarter or helps it make these predictions on what fields to pull. Creating the ML skills, so you can choose the out of the box, and I think my last slide goes through these different options that are out there. But in effect, regardless of the package, you're going to want to train it with at least your own documents. And so you'll grab a sample set of documents that is representative of what's in production. And you'll do this process of labeling, which is basically taking the fields that are in that schema up there and actually highlighting them on any given document. And you go through. And this could be just 10 documents. This could be 200 documents. It depends on what you're pulling out. Like things like tables, which can be very complex, we're going to want a lot more samples. Out of this session called labeling, we create the actual training data. And then once we have this data set, we go through a training process of that ML package. And so that's done through our pipeline activity, if you're familiar with that. And then once that ML package is been trained with your documents, it basically gets versioned, and then you deploy that ML skill with the package. I do want to highlight situations where labeling has gone wrong, because the last thing you want to do is label 500 or 1,000 documents and find out you did it wrong. And one of the big challenges we see is that we don't get a representative sample of the documents. So it's a term called overfitting. So we end up training on all this one vendor, but we should have used a breadth of vendors when we did the training. Honestly, this is a big one too. If someone doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't really care or doesn't understand the impact of what they're doing, that's a problem. So attention to detail, or do they even give a rip? And then the other challenge we see, if we do have multiple people and or teams doing this labeling, are they all kind of doing it the same way? Are they all picking certain fields the same way? Sometimes like a invoice number, it shows up multiple times. Which one do you pick? I have a company logo at the top versus a company footer. Which one do I pick? So we definitely want to coordinate that labeling as well. The three, and I think I'll close out with this, the three situations we see with machine learning. So we mentioned we have this pre-trained out of the box machine learning model. You go and you can see what we have available. We also have a custom, which was brought up earlier, that, hey, is it okay if I do a custom? I hear custom and it sounds like a lot of overhead, etc. The reality is you're going to do labeling in all of these. It's just you're probably going to do a little more labeling in custom because you want to get it trained up and representative. And then the final one is if I have a pre-trained, but I also add some fields that are in that pre-trained model. And when we look at the labeling effort, I probably should have built this out as I talked through it. Obviously, much smaller. If something's pre-trained, you're just using the schema, you're good. In a custom model, you're probably going to have a lot more training data and or samples you'll need. And then down in this category, it kind of sits in between, pretty obvious that, hey, if we add a couple additional fields, we're going to need to train with a set of documents. So there we go. We've got pre-trained models. Custom obviously is not pre-trained, but don't be afraid as long as the document is a good fit and we think it'll work with our model, go for it. So that, I believe, is all I had for ML. Hopefully that was helpful.
Steve, would you mind if I just add something to your point that you just
Sure.
mentioned about the training data that you actually mentioned? So one thing that customers truly when they start with document understanding, they want to understand is how much is the test data that I want to test? And you kind of really align saying capture as much sample data as you can. So how much is really good? So if you have 30 different vendors, at least try and get 30 different samples of each vendor. So that's you've got to get for each vendor, get 30 different samples so that you can start labeling and see how many different invoices or different types of documents that you can get.
So I pasted in. Go ahead, Charles. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll just go ahead and paste that for you. But so there's documentation that's posted that around training high performance models. But in general, if you're training a custom model, you'll be looking at the regular fields requirements and the custom column field requirements, and then also be based off a number of layouts that are being provided. And so most of our models are designed around high diversity. So if you review that document, the document is primarily based around custom models. And the approach we take for pre-trained models is we apply a divisor of 3 to those samples when training the models. So that's a recommendation to start out with for providing samples. But you're wanting to satisfy the field level requirements initially. So you'll total up the number of fields, of regular fields, take that by the multiplier of, I think it's 10 to 20 per regular field. If you look at the documentation, I'll give you a number, and then 20 to 50 by each column field. So back to Steve's point earlier about only pulling out the required fields, right? If you go in with an approach of trying to extract all the data, it's certainly going to increase the number of samples required in order to train that model effectively. But I think the information you're looking for is within that document.